The will of the hello people, welcome to Indie Tunes, the place where the I in Indie Tune stands for endearing. And you may be well aware of the troubled times we endure. People are in power, people who you don't particularly agree with. Their power may even be a threat to your right in enjoying life, whatever it may look like. And surrounded by so much pessimism, we seem to forget who it is who contains the potential. The ones with the true will towards doing good. You may not trust what your dentist tells you, but alongside people, you know the fire in your heart will never die, and collectively, your faith is strong in what is right for your teeth. You don't even need to pay your dentist. Just let the people help out when things fall apart. I'm sure they won't do it for any sort of financial compensation, and we would hope a title like The Will of the People would imbue you with the strength you so desperately need, because there is not a whole lot else the album itself offers. Yeah. Muse. They are art rock band, 90s Coldplay, Radiohead, radioactive. Music for those who tune into Real Rock FM. Boom! As opposed to indie tunes. And that's me already admitting I'm just poking fun at a band that wasn't really my style to begin with. They don't cater for the gender-fucked that is me, the one who would spill all the soup in the soup kitchen. However, they are still one of the many bands I grew up on, passed down from the last generation, and for the most part I did enjoy their work, pertaining to Origin of Symmetry and Absolution, of course. These other two albums are alright. They started to fall off with the release of Resistance, a sci-fi opera including a quote-unquote symphony in the back end. In short, they got pretentious, and subsequent releases would continue that pretentiousness, instead of sticking to what actually works and what the people actually want. Funnily enough, Will of the People in 2022 was not willed by the people. So few actually asked for this, and they certainly didn't ask for this abomination of an artwork. Nothing says Will of the People like slapping the band members' faces on a bunch of dilapidated monuments. And I think I've done enough to help you realize the full extent of its conceptual framework. Another vapid dystopia where there is an angry military, grrr, where there is a Resistance, their fifth full-length album released in 2009, and there are themes of romance, but no profound feelings that go beyond the surface. You would have thought they would try to be a little different, express a well-conceived anguish towards the current situation globally. I'm sure the people have a lot to say about the ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip, maybe too contemporary for 2022, or the war in Ukraine. Mind you, it's probably recorded before then, as this album's rollout was 7 fucking months? What? Talk about washed up, talk about a botched release schedule. No one had the will to give much of a shit. I didn't give much of a shit back then either, when it was released. I heard the first single once, completely forgot about it, then eventually I listened to it in full a few months ago, already aware this was such a flop, a train record you could say, and it just baffled me really. This is the same band that made fucking Origin of Symmetry, so what the fuck actually happened? 37-minute runtime, 10 tracks, thank God they cut this thing brief. So, in the year 2022, you decided to do really shitty Marilyn Manson cosplay at a time that was probably worse than ever as the opener of your album. I think this year, that controversy surrounding him, I didn't give enough of a shit to actually read about what it was, so do it yourself, bitch, had mostly died down. That's apparent because he is once again releasing music, of course to no celebration. I actually did quite like the first single. I'd choose that any day over this abomination. And Matt Bellamy's over here with the megaphone, rallying up the masses. And what do they deliver? A chant from the drunken throats of football hooligans. Did I say football hooligans? Let me reiterate. Bing Bellamy, Buster Wolstenholme, Karis Wolstenholme, Chris Wolstenholme, Dominic Howard, L. Bellamy, Ernie Wolstenholme, Indiana Wolstenholme, Tolhurst, Matt Bellamy, Tabitha Wolstenholme, Tolhurst, Teddy Wolstenhurst, Woolston home. Why the fuck did you ask for credits? I think anyone on the street would do this if you slipped them $10 in their pocket. This track would also fetch a penny from the likes of Henry Ford. Funny how truck commercials can be its own genre at this point. Like, do they not realize they'd committed a cardinal sin that was apparent from the likes of Green Day and Blink-182? This shit never works. Compliance has a really annoying hook, one that is tried and true and is found on any song at this point. Generic, boring, literally nothing to say. And there's not a whole lot to say about Liberation either. It's constantly disrupting what would otherwise be quite a peaceful break from the album's usual bullshit. I guess it's a little tolerable, and mostly because Bellamy tries not to make every moment he appears an excruciating one. Thank you. Won't Stand Down makes me want to sit down and contemplate my life choices. This was the first single, and it's a lot worse than I recall. First things first, they decide to do an Imagine Dragons knockoff, because I guess Muse wasn't pandering enough towards the band kids. That's assuming there are any young fans left. Second thing second, metal riffs, I guess. I don't know, it's just such a sloppy mishmash of contrasting aesthetics. I can't be asked to get into the plain and dull lyrics. There's literally nothing to add to the actual song title, which is sadly becoming more and more prevalent in their work. Ghost, spooky ghost is boring, generic, breakup. I think it's supposed to be sad and emotional, but as always, the overperformed vocals have absolutely no soul. Like, you could at least assume the audience could understand the song's theme, without having it be waved on a bit of paper in front of our eyes. You could have at least left the title at Ghosts without the parentheses. But how would we then get the hint? Good music and subtlety simply doesn't pair when it comes to Muse. It all has to be as straightforward as possible. And of course it's a solo piano piece where you have to be subjected to solely Matt Bellamy's vocals. Anyway, B-side, so I guess Bellamy can move on. In what is possibly one of the most embarrassing switch-ups I've ever seen between tracks. It's a fucking Halloween song, released in August. If they actually released this in October, however, I think 9 of the 10 tracks would have been released as teasers before the actual release. I guess we're just saying fuck it, throwing out any sort of performative sentiment from the previous track to throw it down to some spooky shenanigans. The lyrics is a shopping list of horror movie tropes. There is a bunch of sound effects that are completely out of place and are poorly selected. And despite all of that, it gets the pay close attention title. Why? Because the band for once isn't being a self-indulgent, self-parodying piece of lifeless shit and actually taking the piss with a somewhat fun song. Bellamy's whines are bearable, and he delivers a pretty solid chorus. You almost made me unironically enjoy the album. Maybe next time, get an album out before Santa comes to town. Apparently Kill or Be Killed is generally regarded as the best track on the album, despite it opening to the most blatant Slipknot worship with some really flat sounding drums and just mixing as a whole. Bellamy once again stretches out his vocals, doing some really unnecessary vocalizations on the back end. There's a guitar that sounds like an anti-loitering alarm. Whoop! I don't even know which among them thought it was a good sound. And like Won't Stand Down, the styles used do not mesh at all with one another. There's not much to say about Verona, pretty much the same issues as before. If anyone sent this to me as a love song, I'd probably like it out of pity, because there's nothing that reads as vulnerable as bringing the arena-sized boom to your honeymoon. Then Euphoria puts together all these 80s pastiches as it throttles you by the throat to scream in your face, "Are you having fun yet? Muse can be fun too, you know." It's just sickeningly sweet for how digestible it tries to be. There's synths spiraling out of control, and it's sped up to a point where it's honestly dizzying. Makes me want to jump off the roller coaster it fails at being. And there was a collective eye roll and sigh when we first saw the track list and what the band thought was a suitable choice for the name of the final track. Congrats, you learned the F word. And what's that? You put it twice in a song title? You should really give yourself a pat on the back because you really make it clear this insatiable rage. And what of the song itself? Well, firstly, the opening few seconds, there's the "Are we rolling" bit to remind you that they're just a band, they're just having fun and playing around and getting together with their instruments. What then follows is a post-punky groove, they're penting up the rage with the drums sounding completely out of sync, and Bellamy's crooning vocals being completely drowned out by everything else. For some reason, this one in particular sees him moving away from the falsettos and singing in an octave deeper, and somehow that ended up being more atrocious than the rest of the tracks. And when we get to the actual chorus, it feels so undergratifying as it has one of the worst vocal melodies I've heard from this band. And then they're going all punky in the last bit, shouting, "Hey you, fuck off," or something. I can't remember. I usually skip after the first chorus. I guess it does mention the pandemic, so it ticks the contemporary box. I mean, you couldn't actually avoid it, so what else were you supposed to do? But let's not mention climate change as the cause of wildfires. No, we still got to pander towards the alt-right somehow. Gotta be as non-specific as possible to reach all the angry demographics. But let's mention tsunamis, as though they are a recent development and are not a natural occurrence that have existed for all of time. Someone somewhere said the band was requested to do a greatest hits album, and the response to the label was, "Why not do a greatest hits album, but with only new material?" So that's the excuse for making this record such an eclectic mix that doesn't actually build towards anything. There's nothing to say in terms of album structure because, like a greatest hits album, it's there as an exhibit of all the sounds they've dipped into thus far. And I thought some moments sounded like callbacks. Ghost could maybe fit on Absolution if it wasn't absolute shit. But in pursuit of greatness, they seem to have forgotten the fans themselves, as they continue to dig their own grave. This time, it's the conventions of modern-day rock. Failing to read the room. The whole album feels like I'm being forcibly fed these things, all with a Muse filter over the top, which absolutely fails to make any of it sound unique. They only go out of their comfort zone when the subject is on Halloween. And with that all being said, not everything here is a pain to listen to, despite having the same overblown production. It's lukewarm at best, and when it's shit, it's hurtling towards the lowest places in their discography. Don't bother with this album, I've tried to see some silver lining, but alas. And there's many great albums out there to make up for our loss, one whose funeral was vacant from the start. I mean, that's kind of what happens when, on top of releasing a pile of dog shit, you also sell it as an NFT. Pretty telling of the quality of the music, I reckon. Now, let's see if I can pull off a good impression.
We're at death's door, another world war, wildfires and earthquakes I foresaw, a life in crisis, mutated virus, tsunamis of hate.